and that we have on our website and that are true. But when it comes down a level to, what does that mean in practice? What does that mean? What are we actually trying to get accomplished? It has tended to be in two buckets, and there are other things that we do, but mainly we want to improve people's access to destinations. That's the purpose of transportation. We want people to be able to get where they need to go. At the same time, we want to reduce the number and or distance of vehicle trips, of car, auto, and motor vehicle trips. And those two things have not always, traditionally in decision making around DOTs, they figure that increasing the number and distance of trips is an indicator of improving access. Well, we don't accept that. We want people to be able to meet their needs, the economy to thrive, and all of that stuff while we are actually driving less. So that's kind of the frontier that we're pushing when we talk to folks in DOTs. And this is not super controversial sort of at this high level necessarily, even though DOTs have sort of lazily accepted that more VMT is good in the past. I think we can kind of make this case. But when it gets down into the actual decisions, as we'll see, then it becomes a lot more interesting and a little bit more fraught. So first, why do we care? This is health-oriented transportation. I think most of the people who would dial into this probably already get it and what the negative effects of vehicle miles traveled are. But I just want to touch on them briefly. I don't know that everybody has thought about it this way. If you accept that the most urgent existential public health threat to us right now is climate change, you see that transportation is the leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and in the world, but this is the US. And it's getting worse. You could see here, I need to move this, that the greenhouse gas in transportation is still going up in the United States. And even that, despite the fact that we've had CAFE standards, we're working on electrification, we've had ethanol rules and things like that, you could see that the top line for vehicle miles traveled and the second line, the orange line for GHG, are diverging a little bit, and that divergent does reflect those fuel and vehicle improvements, but they're not diverging that much. And they're both way up since 1990, and they're going the wrong direction. So really, VMT or GHG is really still a function of VMT and transportation to a great extent. And that's not the case in the electric sector, for example. Electric sector is getting cleaner. It's no longer the top generator of GHG in the US, and it's going down. So there are a lot of things we can learn in transportation from the electric sector around efficiency and in generation both, but it's worth comparing the two. If you say, well, it's just the economy, well, electric generation is getting cleaner with the same economy and population growth as transportation is getting dirtier. So that's a problem. Another big area for public health is crashes. And if you look at the beginning of this chart, in the late 20th century, we were diverging fairly rapidly. The roadways were getting safer per mile traveled, or just over time. It was actually, the crashes were decreasing, even if you didn't divide by the miles traveled. Think about the late 20th century. We had safer cars. We didn't have seat belts in the mid 20th century. They came along sort of in the 60s and 70s, and then airbags, drunk driving crusades and laws. So we were making a lot of progress in the late 20th century. But that's no longer the case. If you go to about 2010 or so and follow the last decade, the two lines are now kind of parallel. Once again, crash deaths are a function of VMT. So that's just a fact. So I'm not going to go into all the other health issues that are a function of VMT, but you could well imagine them. There's other kinds of emissions besides greenhouse gas. There's sedentary behavior. There's noise, heat island effects, runoff from all the infrastructure that's required, including salt, et cetera. So hopefully it's clear that VMT drives a lot of negative outcomes, and if we can meet our needs with less VMT, we're better off. Now, so what do we do about it? In um, um, academia and in practice, to some extent, there's a strong understanding of what we need to do. There's lots of papers on this stuff. One of the best came out 10 years ago, and the site is here if you want to go to it, but it's pretty well known. It calls out a number of the D variables that drive VMT. So the density, how close are things packed together in an area or spread out? Diversity, do we have all houses in one area and stores and offices in others, which necessitates a lot of travel around? Design, how are the roadways and sidewalks designed? Can we get around by walking if we need to or want to? Destination accessibility, which I'll come back to, one of the things that we've really been working on at SSTI, and which sort of encompasses some of these others. Distance to transit, so if you have a bus but it's a long way away, you're not going to take it. And again, destination accessibility can subsume that concept as well. It's one reason we kind of like it. And demand management, instead of just building extra supply for transportation, so wider and wider roads, sometimes more transit, you also want to look at the demand side and what you're spurring to be built. And I'm going to come back to that, because both the destination and accessibility and the demand management pieces are what we've really tried to drill down on and work with practice. So there are a lot of things in policy that address VMT. Even federal policy, which is pretty limited, it's mostly just formula grants that come out to states and to some extent to regions, has a lot of language in it, sort of aspirational language about reducing VMT. So this is not like something that we just made up in the last few years. People have been working on this at an aspirational level for a long time. Same thing here at the local level. Back, there was an alder named Satya Rhodes Conway, who a decade ago passed a resolution that said that we were going to make decisions on land use and transportation based on VMT and reducing VMT. That was an aspirational goal, and I would tell you as a member of the Planning Commission has not been lived up to. But we now have a new mayor who is interested in this stuff, so we might start making some progress. So if big general goals are somewhat ineffective, and I would argue that that is the case, and could give you more examples. What do we need to do? What are the barriers? Where do we actually do our work? We think that the barriers are that too many things deal with big policy and plans rather than practice and projects. So we want to focus on practice and projects. And to do that, we need things like standards and metrics. Every day in our field, there are millions of decisions that are made, most of them by staff or staff in consult with some legislative body that just sort of rubber stamps it. And then, I don't know, a small fraction reach the level of public discourse. But all of those decisions, whether they're just the most routine or the most contentious in public, need standards and metrics that point us away from VMT growth and toward VMT reduction. And a lot of our standards currently go the opposite direction. They really do. They say if we have cars are going too slow, we need to widen the roads. So we have the LOS rule, level of service rule, which we'll come to in a few minutes. Is a big one that people on this call may be really familiar with, but there are many, many, many others. Sort of as examples of the two ways to approach this and the high level sort of generalities and the usable specifics. Our friends at NACTO, who I really mean are friends, I think they're doing really great work. A number of years ago came out with an urban street design guide, and it's great. It has a lot of great ideas in it. I would urge people who are interested in design, they probably already know about it, but if you're just coming into this field and you want to see some examples of good urban design, that it's right there for you. The problem is it doesn't set any standards. It doesn't tell you that if this condition exists, you do this turning radius or this lane width or this, or it's just sort of, it's again, it's sort of like inspirational for people who want to pick it up and use it, but it doesn't affect those myriad of decisions that are being made over and over in a way that we would really like. So that's not to say it's bad, it just didn't quite go far enough. They have, in contrast, upcoming a guide to setting speed limits. Speed limits, as many people on the call may know, traditionally have been set by how fast the cars are going. Kind of shocking when you first hear that. It sounds crazy. Like, why would we do that? We want to set speed limits to keep cars from going too fast. So if cars are going too fast, why would we set speed limits at that speed? But that's what we do. And NACDO has come up, it hasn't been released yet, but it will be later this year, with a new way to, and people have seen drafts of it, so it's not a secret, to set safe speeds and not rely on how fast the cars are going to set the speeds. And in cities, it often says 20 to 25 miles an hour, depending on the context. It's a lot slower than what we get with our 85th percentile, how fast the car's going in a lot of cases. And since it's very specific and very actionable, this is going to have a lot more effect. It already has. Before it's even come out, the state of Oregon basically adopted it a month ago, like in early April. So that's sort of the difference between like generalities and aspirations and big goals and standards and actually affecting practice. So now I want to go into a few examples of what we've worked on in that realm, that trying to affect the decision making in practice. Now I want to go back to destination access. Destination access is like, how easily can I get to from point A to point B? And point A could be a neighborhood, and point B could be a job center, or jobs could be distributed all around. So like, how many jobs can I get to in a certain amount of time? That kind of thing. I don't think I really have time on this call, but we could go into like how we specify that. Just if you'll accept that we have a tool that addresses how easily I can get from point A to point B, and we can apply that across a bunch of different places and rate them. If you're familiar with walk score, which is a common metric for people who are renting apartments or selling houses, they talk about how walkable the neighborhood is. It's something like that. So it's how much can I get to from a certain place. And we measure the ease of getting there in terms of travel time with an asterisk. Again, it's not exactly travel time, but think of it as travel time for now. And if people want to put in the chat, please give me more, I can come back to it. If you've ever been to Virginia Beach, Virginia, this is the highway that goes from Norfolk, Virginia down to the ocean front. There's a bunch of houses over here. There's a bunch of stores over here and jobs. And this would have really good walking access to this activity center. And all the people who live there would have great walk scores, but for this highway, because you can't get across it. So you see this hard edge here. So we might imagine a project that surmounts that highway. And here we sketched in a couple of potentials. This is an overpass, and this is making this existing underpass walkable. At the current time, it is not. And you can see how much the change in accessibility is for each of these little chunks of geography down here. On a 1 to 100 scale, some of them go up by more than 15 points, which is pretty big considering we didn't change land use at all. All we did was make it easier to get to the existing land uses. And then we can excuse me, we could tally all those up and average them out, and then we could say this project provides this much more access to destinations than another one, or we can compare, and we can compare across modes. So if there's a walking project and a transit project and a bike project, or one that does all of those modes in some way or another, we can add them up and calculate them. And in Virginia, they've been using that metric to pick transportation projects for the last 5 years. You can see that the numbers, don't worry about what the numbers mean too much. Again, I could, if people are interested, I could go into it, but they're counting access to jobs. They're giving extra points for disadvantaged communities' access to jobs and what the project provides. Multimodal access is something a little different. I won't get into that, but the land use score is basically the walk score that I was just showing you. So these are scored and added up, and there are other criteria as well. They add up to a project benefit score. They divide it by the cost, and that's the ones that they fund. And you can see that in the past, as opposed to projects in the past, which were kind of, the biggest project got the most attention. Here we get a mix of size of projects and modes. So that the salmon color are roadway projects. The gray is a transit project or an ITS project, excuse me. So that's just a signage and can't remember exactly what it was, but a signage project. The redder color is transit and the green is bike and ped. So all the modes can kind of compete against each other for bang for the buck. So that's been a successful system. The legislature's had ample opportunity to blow it up and kill it, but it's really taken root. People get the idea of accessibility as a metric, and it's been relatively straightforward to score. So that's example number one. Example number two, we took this idea and decided to look at what do these different modal accessibilities tell us if we put them together in a model. So if we know that auto accessibility to jobs is this number and walking accessibility to non-work destinations is that number, we have all these accessibilities. Can we model, can we predict what VMT is going to be? And it turns out, yes, indeed we can, or what modes people are going to take. And that turns out to be pretty powerful. It's not being used in Virginia that way, but we took it to Hawaii where they had a policy goal, a glittering goal that they were going to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips, but no idea really how to do it because there was no metric, no standard. So let's try this one. And we scored all of their projects based on that, sort of a rubric. It ended up not being the exact model that you saw, but it was close. And again, I don't want to go into all the details, but basically anything that raised accessibility by non-auto modes kind of went up in points, where anything that raised auto accessibility went down in points on criteria. And again, some projects did both. If you widened a road and put in bike lanes, then it got, kind of went up for one and down for the other. And then top rated project in the state ended up to be this one. You have two parts of a neighborhood, basically. Houses up here, more of the activity center, including the school down here, but separated by this gully. And this, I think there may actually be a river in it. There used to be a railroad crossing there, but it's gone. So this is basically impassable to go across, and you have to go out and drive several miles, even though this is only about, I think, a little bit less than half a mile across. So the top project in the state ended up to be a bike ped crossing to connect these two parts of the neighborhood. And I guarantee you that those things, somebody had already thought of it. I mean, it wasn't like the scoring system that we came up with originated this idea, but I guarantee you this was not the sexy project on the list in conventional way, where we're looking at how fast the cars go. So it really helped with that. Let me give you a couple of an example of how this works with land use. We did a project with the city of La Crosse, which is trying to build some infill density on 3 sites. One was an old Kmart, and then there's a couple of just older, kind of either underused or empty spots that they have identified as targets for redevelopment. But that's a little bit cutting across the grain in La Crosse. The business as usual is to build sprawl, like in most places. So we took a look at these project areas and what the city thought they were going to be able to site there. And we were able to say that if they did that, we could compare it to business as usual. And so on the access to jobs and access to transit, we were able to give them some numbers that showed that infill, particularly on transit, compared very well. And that was nice. They appreciated that. That sort of validated it. That would help them sell these plans. But what really did it is to take it that next step and look at VMT and mode share with that model that I just described. So with VMT, if you do infill, you have a reduction in VMT, pretty substantial, a couple percentage points for VMT per person. That adds up to many tons of carbon per day. Transit ridership gets a big boost with the infill and very little change at all in the sprawl scenario. So if you're looking at outcomes like VMT and transit ridership, as opposed to just having a big goal that says, hey, we're going to reduce VMT, or hey, we're going to reduce single occupancy vehicle and shift to transit, you really need a way to measure the projects as you go along. And this is the land use example, similar to the transportation example in Hawaii. And I'm going to just do a little bit more on this, where transportation and land use come together. Some work that we've done in California, partly out of a really good law that was passed in 2013, SB 743. A lot of people have heard of SB 375. It's, that was their big climate law that passed, I can't remember what year, but it was before 2013, probably 8 years before. So it required a lot of planning hoops to jump through for every region in the state to show that they were going to reduce emissions, and mainly through VMT. Hasn't worked. It's easy to game. The regions that do the modeling don't control land use or really much about transportation. Really has not worked, even though that was seen as like maybe the big silver bullet. It hasn't done nothing, but it hasn't accomplished its goals. It's again, throw something in the chat if you want to fight me on that or learn more about it. So SB 743 came along and attacked this whole level of service thing, which, if you're not into transportation lingo, I mentioned it at the beginning. It's a level of service is a standard that has been kind of the Bible of transportation planning for a long time. It says if cars are going slower, i.e. the level of service is going down, we need to, that's a signal that we need to address it now. You could address it through charging tolls or some other operational strategy, but 99.9% of the time that's meant widening the road or grade separating it, adding highway capacity, basically. And SB 743 said we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to review these projects, whether they're transportation or land use projects, and this law covered both, for level of service. That's out the door. You can look at a level of service for other reasons, but it's not going to be done under our environmental review law, which is the big way to review these projects. And it said, in fact, we're going to do VMT. And in 2013, everybody said, well, that's nice, but we don't know how. So they've been working for the last few years to develop that. And it's pretty well now ensconced on the land use side. It's somewhat similar to what I showed you for La Crosse. The very first program that came along, really in real time, they were developing this around the time the law passed, so it wasn't mandated, but they were doing it anyway, was in Pasadena. And Pasadena had decided that they had all these LOS rules that were causing roads to be widened or tamping down on infill. Like a lot of infill projects couldn't be built because they were going to lower LOS standards. There were going to be too many cars, supposedly. So they changed the whole focus to VMT and a whole different set of criteria that speak to multimodal travel. Now they do have an LOS thing, but it's really kind of probably too weedy to get into. The main thing is they they switched to this VMT per capita of 22.6. Any project that was going to generate more VMT than that would have to do something to mitigate it. And if they didn't, they could come in and not really worry too much about level of service. And so they got a lot of good infill projects that they had been making hard before. And the one or two that had problems with the standard were made better because of it. So for example, there was a healthcare facility that was going to raise the VMT per capita by more than the allowable limit. So they made it a mixed use project and put some housing in it, and that tipped the balance down and lowered the VMT and was a better project. So they're pretty happy with that. It is a complicated, and I'm only showing you the tip of the iceberg in Pasadena. It's a complicated way to calculate things. They happen to have their own demand model in Pasadena, which is very unusual for a city that size. So other places have had to do the same thing, but in a more straightforward, stripped down way. So in San Jose, it's all a spreadsheet. You want to build something in San Jose, you come and you add a few values into the spreadsheet, it calculates your VMT, and then you can go in and say, well, okay, I'm going to mitigate it then if I'm over the limit. I'm going to charge for parking. I'm going to give out bus passes, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you move it to a different site. Maybe you change the land use mix. And so you can, and it's, before you even show up at the door with your plans, you can already have a pretty good idea that you're going to be able to get through the program and not wait for evaluation. Again, it's all focused on reducing vehicle trips. San Francisco has an even more stripped down program, relies on fewer variables that the developer enters in. And instead of like trying to actually calculate the VMT out of it, it just tells you how many points you have to achieve in mitigation if you're over the limit. And it tells you get a big menu of things that you could do, TDM measures. This is just a tiny snippet of 5 or 6 pages worth, but if you look at the very bottom, if you do something like a new shuttle bus, you get a lot of points for that. On the other hand, if you just put in a bicycle repair station, that's nice, but probably not super impactful, so you only get 1 point for that. And the way points are calculated are how much are you over the anticipated VMT limit. We worked with the city of LA to sort of develop a similar program there, and wrote a report out of it. So if this is interesting to you, I would send you to this link. It tries to take these questions and pull them all into sort of a generic package that doesn't rely on California law or any particular setting. And it addresses 3 key questions, like which land uses should mitigate VMT, like is there a de minimis level, or what kinds of land uses, and so forth, and can you just get out of jail free if it looks like you're not gonna have any parking and not generate any trips, that kind of thing. Then how do you calculate the mitigation? So that you saw the San Francisco menu. We have a menu that's even more extensive and we think even better, but because partly we stole some of theirs and then added on. And then how do you enforce the requirements, and how do you make the land uses report what they're doing and make sure that it's actually happening? So those are general questions that apply everywhere. And we took some best practices from other places outside of California as well, like Arlington, Virginia, Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's all there. Just a little bit about this report. You can't read this. This is just meant to be a appetite whetter. We focus a lot on parking. Is one, we know that if there's a lot of parking, we're probably going to get a lot of car travel. There's a strong relationship there. So if you can, again, show up at the door without a parking lot, we have a high level of confidence that you're not going to be generating a lot of VMT, and vice versa. So in LA, they're basing this program really on the parking stalls. For the different size of project and the number of parking stalls, in this case, it's per 500 square feet of non-residential, or it could be by dwelling unit or what have you. And that's what tells you how many points you got to get off of that menu. So they're still in the process of implementing it there. Talking to people in Madison about a similar um, program here. Massachusetts is nosing around this. Hope that it will take off and get outside of California and really start to affect decision making. I don't have as neat a package on the destination access stuff that I showed that I can send you to on our website. We have technical memos and project-based stuff, but we are writing a how-to manual on that. We have a grant from the Pneumo Foundation, and that's due out this year. So later this year, we should have both the demand management and the destination access, how to do it, manuals that that should help practice and turning the corner on reducing VMT. So that's what I got. I'm happy to take questions or comments.
See, Jonathan here has a question. Why don't you go ahead?
Yes. So Eric, in this time, post COVID or during COVID, we've seen, as we were talking right before you began, about news from Paris and Seattle, and you mentioned even Madison is talking about widening bike trails and expanding biking. So here's a question about most DOTs, many DOTs or multiple DOTs considering a truly different post-COVID transportation system, or are they asking for stimulus funds to build back better? This is sort of the UN is pushing hard on this build back better. Or are the DOTs, do you think they're just waiting for the vaccine and they'll make some short-term changes, but that we'll go back to business as usual? What is your sense there?
I think the ones that were already trying to move in the right direction will use this as an opportunity to move further in the right direction. Let no good crisis go to waste, sort of thing.
Right.
We're doing a lot of work in California where they're getting the DOT is getting pushed by the legislature to improve its performance. They just hired a director who's strongly an advocate for multimodalism, and they're so there's a lot of movement there. They got a long way to go because their practice has been kind of abysmal in the past. On the other hand, here in Wisconsin, we've got a project that's just getting under the way to extend the Beltline further to the east and build more interstate, more freeway over by Ho Chunk to quote unquote relieve a safety problem. There is truly a safety problem there, but we're going, instead of slowing down the cars and making it more multimodal, we're going to make it more auto-centric. So I think among cities, there's a lot more nimbleness and awareness, and you'll see more progress among the bigger regional and state entities. It's probably, I wouldn't hold up a huge amount of hope. But there are good cases out there, and our job at SSTI with this community of practice is take the good examples and try to spread them around. I don't think WISDOT is potentially being evil here. I think they're applying a conventional, old school solution to, to a problem in the way they always have, and were taught to do it and haven't kind of gotten with the times.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a small question while others are gathering their thoughts. You were showing the fatality rates and they were coming down, and then there was a little blip up. I assume that's from distracted driving, that we're seeing a little uptick in crashes.
Well, that's what people would like to blame it on. Chris McCahill, whom you know, Jonathan, but my colleague at SSTI has looked into that. There's not really any good evidence that that's true. Cell phones have been around now for a generation. To all of a sudden say that it's, you know, it's that. Sure, there are examples of distracted driving, but it's fairly small. There are things like um, bigger automobiles with bigger, more dangerous front ends to pedestrians. That is a factor. But I think overall it's just being driven by the fact that there's more VMT. There's more exposure to danger, the more auto travel there is. So distracted driving is big. Our view is that's a little bit of a distraction, no pun intended. I see a remark about mass transit post-COVID, and it's a point that is well taken. The whole future of transit is really going to be, you know, until there is a vaccine, transit is going to be on the ropes, and you know, agencies are straining to do what they can. It's kind of like restaurants. You know, transit and restaurants will probably like be on the same trajectory. Even if we open up restaurants, we're going to do it at like 20% capacity. People will have to stay away from the bar. You know, buses we may open up more, but people will have to. We won't let it get full, and you know we're come in the back door, that kind of thing. So that is a great point. It's pretty scary to think, and it's going to take a while for transit to come back. I do agree with that.
Does anybody else have a question for Eric?
So I
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go. You go, Sam. I've asked twice. Go for it.
I'm just curious, in your dealings with DOTs, when prioritizing projects and identifying projects that have the greatest impact on reducing VMT, what tools and metrics would you find useful that don't already exist in your arsenal? What can we do to help people like you who work directly with DOTs?
So the destination accessibility with the you know, this model, this post-processing model is the one that we've been using the most. Another pretty straightforward one that's being used in California is a simple elasticity. There's a relationship between lane miles added and VMT that you induce. So if you know what the VMT already is, what the lane miles already are, what the project is going to add, you can calculate what the new VMT is going to be. So there's a calculator on the UC Davis website that they're going to be using when they judge projects. The other big thing that people do use is four-step models. They're not very adequate for this. They tend not to see bike and ped travel because the units of the geographic units are too big. Some of the more granular ones could be used for this, like in Pasadena, but by and large, they're not super good for it. So, you know, my view is between the destination accessibility and some kind of elasticity measure, you could pretty well determine the effect of projects on VMT. And so what people could do is to make that people aware of that. Maybe I wouldn't say attack, because models have the four-step model has its place, but remind people that four-step model wasn't designed for that sort of thing. Four-step model was designed to, in the suburban era, tell us which highways to widen first in order to accommodate suburban growth. Really what it was for. There are ways to, again, turn it around, and if you try to do VMT with it, but it's not very good.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question, Sam, unless someone else has one, but I'll let them, they have priority if you have another question there.
You go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay. So Eric, let's assume that we've discovered a vaccine and we're all fine and we can get back to our normal, use mass transit, and let's go back before COVID. If you had the governor's ear and he asked you for the state of Wisconsin, what is the best thing to do for the next, in the next 5 years, what would be a 1 or 2 or 3 priority big ticket things to invest in? What would you tell the governor? Say, you know what, if you had X amount of money, you would put it in these 1 or 2 priority areas for the state.
That's a great question. And it's so being Wisconsin specific, we would go back to something that we had in the Doyle administration, which was a complete streets policy. We would have learned something in the last 15 years, so we would make it better. We would identify the gaps in the walking and biking transit networks and put money into fixing them. And our accessibility tools or other tools, whatever pick something that works. I think the destination access is good, but if you don't like that, pick something else and make sure that we're not creating barriers to access. On the car side, and I don't want to make it sound like we're just envisioning a future with no cars. That's not really, I mean, as much as I might like that, that's not realistic. We don't manage our traffic very well in Wisconsin. We don't have a toll in the state. And best practice is to manage peak hour congestion with congestion pricing. So I would pass a law that allows that if necessary, and it might, but then invest in all the infrastructure, which isn't super expensive compared to adding lanes, to manage the traffic so that we don't have to build more lanes. Best practice in this case is in Virginia on I-66 in the DC area. They can have some quite substantial tolls. If you go in at 8:30 in the morning or between 7 and 9 in the morning, you might pay $20 to go on I-66. That suggests maybe don't do it. Take the bus instead, or go at a different time when it's not crowded, or it's a price signal to maybe avoid doing that, number one. And number two, they take a chunk of that money and they put it into transit so that people do have options to avoid driving in that corridor at that time. So I don't know, those are 2 big things. One on the car side with operations, and one on the non-auto side with just improving the access and complete streets.
Great, thanks.
Well, unless there are any other comments from the audience, I think we could thank Eric and wrap up this month's seminar. I'm not sure exactly when we'll have the next one. We're tentatively planning for September, but we might try to hold one over the summer since the webinar format has made it a little bit more convenient, if a little less social. So Eric, I just want to say thanks for your time. It was a very interesting presentation. I'll give the audience one last chance for questions, and then I will end the meeting.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Jonathan and Sam, and thanks everybody for putting up with me for an hour or 45 minutes.
No, it's great.
Okay.
All right, everybody stay safe and take care.
Build back better.
Yes.
Okay. Bye now.
See you. Thanks again, Eric. Thanks, Sam. And